The 19th of July 1942. What would you do if the desert around you was so silent you could hear your own heartbeat? And somewhere in that darkness wounded men were whispering for a medic while enemy patrols hunted anything that moved. In the scorching emptiness of North Africa during the Second World War, a brutal kind of soldier was being forged under the African night sky. Men who would later be whispered about as the commandos of the desert. Raiders who slipped through miles of enemy territory where maps meant little and survival often came down to nerve, luck, and the steady hands of a medic working under gunfire. On that July night in 1942, a small group of commandos crept across the Libyan sand toward an Axis airfield near Sidi Hanish. The kind of mission most armies would call impossible because the odds were insane. But these guys had already learned something the desert teaches fast. You either adapt or you disappear. And tonight their job was simple on paper, but terrifying in reality. Drive straight into the airfield and destroy as many German and Italian aircraft as possible before the enemy realized what was happening. But before they even reached the target, something went wrong. One truck hit soft sand and bogged down, another nearly rolled in the darkness. And somewhere in the distance, a flare briefly lit the horizon like ghostly daylight, revealing the endless dunes where patrols could appear any second. Inside one of the vehicles sat the team medic, a man carrying more than just bandages and morphine. He carried the quiet understanding that when things went sideways, he would be the last thin line between life and death for everyone around him. And in commando raids, that line got crossed a lot. Because these operations were savage lightning strikes, short, violent, and often chaotic. When the convoy finally roared into the airfield, they didn't sneak. They slammed the gas and charged straight down the runway with machine guns blazing, tracers ripping through parked bombers and fighters, while explosions started popping like thunderclaps across the tarmac. Fuel tanks erupted into towering flames, and suddenly the quiet desert became a blazing battlefield. German guards scrambled in confusion, thinking they were under attack by a much larger force. But amid the chaos, a burst of enemy fire ripped into one of the trucks, and a commando went down hard. The medic jumped from the moving vehicle into sand illuminated by burning aircraft, bullets snapping overhead like angry hornets. And what happened next became the kind of story soldiers pass around for decades. Because treating a wounded man under fire isn't just medicine, it's courage bordering on madness. Kneeling in hot sand with explosions echoing across the airfield, the medic worked fast, checking the wound, clamping bleeding with trembling hands while shouting for cover fire. And for a moment, the world shrank to the sound of breathing and the smell of fuel burning in the night air. Because when a man is dying beside you, time stops being measured in minutes and starts being measured in heartbeats. Commandos dragged the injured soldier back toward the truck while the raid kept roaring around them. Aircraft after aircraft exploding in orange fireballs. But the horror of the battlefield had its own twisted personality. Because in the shadows between flames you could see things no one forgets. Bodies half hidden in smoke, silhouettes running through firelight, and the eerie sight of wrecked planes burning silently like giant torches in the desert night. And through it, all the medic kept moving, checking another wounded man, handing out morphine syringes, shouting for drivers to keep rolling before enemy reinforcements arrived. Raids like this were the secret weapon of the Desert War, carried out by small teams who survived on grit and sheer stubbornness. And what many people don't realize is how brutal the environment itself was. During the day, the sun could roast metal until it burned your skin. And at night, the temperature could drop so fast your breath fogged in the air. Sandstorms could erase tracks in minutes, leaving men stranded miles from anywhere. And sometimes the scariest moments weren't gunfights, but the long silent hours after a raid when commandos had to escape across hundreds of miles of empty desert hoping their engines didn't fail and their water didn't run out. One veteran later described nights when the desert felt haunted, were wrecked vehicles from earlier battles, stuck out of the sand like skeletons, and the wind made strange noises through broken metal, sounds that could make even hardened fighters glance over their shoulders. Because war in North Africa had a strange horror all its own. A mix of isolation and sudden violence, where a quiet horizon could explode into combat without warning. After the Sidi Hanish raid, the commandos sped back into the darkness, leaving dozens of destroyed Axis aircraft behind them. One of the most daring attacks of the Desert War. But the escape was no victory parade, because the wounded still needed care and enemy patrols were already searching the area. Somewhere out in that black desert, the medic worked again inside the bouncing truck, holding a lantern while stitching wounds as the vehicle rattled over dunes. The smell of blood mixing with engine oil and desert dust. And every man inside that convoy knew something simple but powerful. Without that medic, their chances of surviving the raid dropped fast. The truth about these commandos is that heroism didn't always look like charging a machine gun. Sometimes it looked like a man kneeling in sand under enemy fire, trying to keep another soldier alive. And those quiet acts often decided whether missions ended in triumph or tragedy. Stories from these African commando operations reveal how thin the line between bravery and horror could be. There were nights when raiders stumbled across the aftermath of earlier battles. Abandoned camps, shattered vehicles, even the grim remains of soldiers who never made it home. Reminders that the desert keeps its secrets buried under drifting sand. Yet despite the danger, these commandos kept going back again and again, striking airfields, supply depots, and convoys across Libya and Egypt. Because every successful raid weakened the Axis grip on North Africa and bought time for larger Allied forces pushing across the region. Historians often focus on the big battles like El Alamein, but hidden behind those famous victories were countless small missions, carried out by men who operated far beyond normal front lines. And among them, the medics were the quiet lifeline holding everything together. Imagine being that medic after a raid, the adrenaline fading, the trucks finally stopping miles away from the battlefield. And in the weak glow of a lantern, you check each wounded soldier one more time while the desert stretches endlessly around you. Silent again, as if the chaos never happened. And in that silence you realize something chilling. If the enemy had caught them out there, no one would have heard the fight and no rescue would have come. That was the reality of the 1940s Africa Commandos. Courage mixed with fear. Heroism tangled with moments that felt straight out of a nightmare. And it's exactly why their missions still fascinate historians and veterans alike. Because these were not just soldiers following orders. They were men stepping into the unknown night after night, knowing the desert itself could become their grave. Now here's the question that still sparks debate among war historians and veterans alike. When a mission demands risking everything in hostile territory, where survival odds are razor thin, do you think courage comes from training? Or from the terrifying moment when a soldier realizes there's no way back and the only path left is forward through the darkness? Drop your thoughts in the comments and share this story with someone who loves real war history. Because the hidden stories of these desert commandos prove that some of the most shocking truths of World War II were written not in massive battles, but in the silent, burning nights of the African desert, where a handful of men changed the course of war.